3 days after my 68th birthday, I found myself sleeping on a thin mattress in the basement of the house I'd owned for 40 years, listening to my daughter-in-law Vanessa's dinner party through the ceiling vents. When I sold that house a month later, the one they'd been planning their future in, I didn't just gain my freedom, I reclaimed my dignity. But let me start from the beginning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I remember the day my late husband Thomas and I bought our Victorian home on Maple Grove Lane like it was yesterday. The real estate agent had warned us the place needed work, but Thomas just squeezed my hand and whispered, "Margaret, imagine what we could make of this." We spent the next 30 years pouring our hearts into every corner of that house, refinishing the oak floors ourselves, planting the garden that became the envy of the neighborhood, saving for years to renovate, the kitchen with the bay window I'd always dreamed of. After Thomas passed away 6 years ago, I stayed in our home alone. It was too big for just me, but every creaking floorboard and sun-dappled corner held memories I wasn't ready to part with. My son Daniel visited often, bringing groceries and checking the furnace before winter set in. He'd sit at the kitchen table where he'd once done his homework, telling me about his job at the architectural firm downtown. When Daniel met Vanessa at a colleague's wedding, I was thrilled. He'd been alone too long since his divorce, and Vanessa seemed to bring out a lightness in him I hadn't seen in years. She was beautiful and charming, with a marketing director position at a luxury brand and an easy laugh that filled rooms. Welcomed her into our Sunday dinners, taught her Thomas's secret recipe for blueberry scones, even altered my own mother's wedding dress when they announced their engagement. "You're the mother I never really had," she told me one evening, eyes glistening as we sorted through old photo albums. My heart swelled. My own daughter had moved to Australia years ago. We spoke monthly, but the distance was hard. Having Vanessa felt like a second chance at a daughter close by. The trouble began subtly, the way most important things do. Daniel and Vanessa's apartment lease was ending, and they mentioned casually over dinner that they were house hunting. "Nothing feels right," Vanessa sighed, swirling her wine. "Everything in our price range needs so much work." Daniel looked at me across the pot roast I'd spent all afternoon preparing. "Mom, we've been thinking. This house is really too big for just you, and the stairs can't be easy on your knees." They weren't, but I'd grown accustomed to taking them slowly, one hand on the banister Thomas had carved himself. "What if," Vanessa continued, leaning forward, "we moved in here? We could help with maintenance, you wouldn't be alone, and we'd save on a mortgage." It sounded reasonable enough. The house was too big. My arthritic knees did protest the stairs more each year, and I'd been lonely since Thomas died. The kind of loneliness that settles into your bones and becomes part of you. "We could convert the basement into a proper apartment for you," Daniel added quickly. "Private entrance, kitchenette, everything you'd need." I hesitated, looking around my kitchen, at the height marks penciled on the doorframe tracking Daniel's growth, at the slight burn mark on the counter from the time Thomas and I got distracted making Christmas dinner. But I saw the hope in my son's eyes, and I remembered how Thomas always said families should stick together. "Let me think about it," I said. 2 weeks later, they moved in. I told myself it was the practical choice. I told myself I was being selfish, wanting to rattle around alone in a 4-bedroom house. I told myself family meant compromise. The renovations to the basement started immediately. I moved temporarily into the guest room while Daniel and Vanessa took the master bedroom. "Just until your new space is ready, Mom." Vanessa repainted the living room a stark white, covering the warm sage green Thomas and I had chosen 20 years earlier. My antique furniture disappeared into storage, replaced by modern pieces that looked like they belonged in a magazine, but felt cold to the touch. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I didn't say anything when my garden was partially paved over for additional parking space. I smiled when Vanessa's book club took over the sunroom where I used to read every afternoon. I nodded understandingly when they explained they needed the dining room to entertain Daniel's colleagues. It's important for his career, Margaret. My name was Margaret, but I'd always been Mom to everyone. Vanessa's use of my first name created a subtle distance I felt, but couldn't quite name. The basement renovation stretched from weeks into months. The contractor Vanessa's friend recommended was perpetually delayed. Materials were back-ordered. Permits took longer than expected. Meanwhile, the guest room I was staying in gradually transformed too. First into a home office for Vanessa, then a storage space for their overflow possessions. Just a few more weeks, Daniel promised, not quite meeting my eyes over his laptop at what had once been my kitchen table. 8 months after they moved in, I found myself setting up that thin mattress in the still unfinished basement. The concrete. Floors were cold, but at least I had a space that was mine, even if it smelled faintly of mildew and the ceiling was crisscrossed with exposed pipes. That night, as I lay listening to the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses above me, Vanessa, hosting another dinner party I hadn't been invited to, I traced a crack in the ceiling with my eyes. One particular voice carried through the vents clearly, Vanessa's college friend who worked in real estate. "This place is going to be worth a fortune once you finish the renovations," she was saying. "Your mother-in-law is sitting on gold mine property in this neighborhood." "I know," Vanessa replied, voice lowered but still audible through the old house's vents. "And we're the only ones in the will. Daniel's sister hasn't visited in years. She's practically abandoned his mother. We're the ones taking care of her." Taking care of me? I stared at the water stain above my head. Is that what they called this? Relegating me to the basement of my own home? But then again, wasn't I being ungrateful? They were right. I couldn't manage the house alone much longer. Maybe this was what getting older meant, a slow, dignified retreat from the spaces you once commanded. I rolled over on the thin mattress, my hip aching against the hardness beneath the inadequate padding. Through the small window near the ceiling, I could see the branches of the maple tree Thomas and I had planted when Daniel was born. The leaves were just beginning to turn gold around the edges, catching the streetlight in brief flashes when the wind blew. That's when I heard Vanessa clearly through the vent. "Don't worry, it won't be much longer. Her doctor says her arthritis is getting worse. We'll convince her to move to Sunny Pines Retirement Village by Christmas. Then we can finally finish the renovations properly, without worrying about disrupting her." I lay perfectly still, feeling something cold and certain settle in my chest. The pain in my hip suddenly seemed very far away. I didn't sleep that night. The basement's chill seemed to seep into my bones as I replayed Vanessa's words over and over. By morning, something had changed inside me, a quiet, smoldering ember of indignation that I hadn't felt in years. I made my way upstairs at 6 a.m., my knees protesting each step. The kitchen was still littered with wine glasses and small plates from last night's gathering. I filled the kettle for tea, my morning ritual for over 40 years, and gazed out at the maple tree through the bay window, my window that Thomas had saved for 3 years to install for our 20th anniversary. The house was quiet, except for the distant sound of Daniel's snoring from the master bedroom. I opened the antique secretary desk in the corner, one of the few pieces of my furniture that had survived Vanessa's redecorating purge. Inside were the household files I still maintained meticulously, even though Daniel and Vanessa had taken over paying the utilities. Among the folders was a thick envelope marked property. Inside was the deed to the house, the original mortgage documents, paid off 15 years ago, and recent property tax assessments. I ran my fingers over Thomas's signature beside mine on the deed, remembering how his hand had trembled slightly with excitement the day we signed it. I was lost in thought when I heard footsteps on the stairs. Quickly, I returned the documents to their folder, but left it on the desk. "Mom, you're up early," Daniel said, rubbing sleep from his eyes. His hair was thinning in the same pattern as his father's, and for a moment, my heart ached with how much I missed Thomas. "I've always been an early riser, you know that?" I replied, pouring hot water over my tea bag. He glanced at the messy countertops, looking slightly embarrassed. "Sorry about the kitchen. Vanessa was too tired to clean up after everyone left." I waved dismissively. "It's fine. I'll take care of it." Daniel grabbed the coffee Vanessa had programmed to brew automatically each morning. "How's the basement? Is it comfortable enough? I know it's not ideal, but—" "Actually," I interrupted, surprising myself with my directness, "I wanted to talk to you about that. I've been thinking about the house situation." Daniel's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. "What about it?" I gestured to the folder on the desk. "I've been reviewing some documents. Did you know the property value has nearly tripled since your father and I bought this place?" Daniel glanced at the folder, then back at me with newfound attention. "I knew the neighborhood had become more desirable, but I didn't realize it was that significant." "Neither did I, until recently." I sipped my tea, the warmth spreading through my chest, bolstering my courage. "I've been considering my options." Before Daniel could respond, Vanessa appeared in the doorway, silk robe belted tightly around her waist, hair perfectly tousled in a way that surely took effort to appear effortless. "Good morning," she said, her eyes quickly taking in the scene. The folder on the desk, Daniel's concerned expression, the mess from last night still covering the countertops. "Margaret, you shouldn't worry about cleaning up. I was going to take care of it." "It's no trouble," I said, already rinsing glasses in the sink. "I've been managing this household for longer than you've been alive." The slight edge in my voice must have caught her attention. Vanessa exchanged a glance with Daniel before approaching me at the sink. "Actually, Margaret, we wanted to talk to you about something." Her voice had taken on that careful, overly patient tone people sometimes use with the elderly. "Daniel and I have been looking into some wonderful senior living communities. Have you?" I said, scrubbing a stubborn wine stain from a crystal glass, one of the few pieces remaining from the set Thomas had given me for our 25th anniversary. "Sunny Pines has a beautiful campus," Daniel added, coming to stand beside Vanessa, in a united front. "Private apartments, social activities, dining services, and the best part is they have medical staff on site." "For when my arthritis gets worse?" I asked, setting down the glass carefully and turning to face them both. Daniel blinked in surprise. "Well, yes, actually. It would give us peace of mind knowing you're being properly cared for." "And it would free you from the burden of this big house," Vanessa added, gesturing around the kitchen that no longer resembled the heart of the home Thomas and I had created. "We could take you for a tour next weekend. They have an opening in their assisted living wing." I dried my hands slowly, considering my next words carefully. "That's very thoughtful of you both." Relief washed over Daniel's face. "Really? I thought you might resist the idea." "Not at all," I said, walking over to the bay window to look out at my garden, now partially covered in gravel for extra parking. "Change is part of life. But before we tour any retirement facilities, I think I should speak with my lawyer." The silence that followed was immediate and tense. When I turned back, Vanessa's smile had frozen in place, and Daniel was frowning slightly. "Your lawyer?" he asked. "Why would you need to speak with a lawyer about a retirement community?" "Oh, it's not about the retirement community," I said, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. "It's about the house. If I'm going to move out completely, we need to decide what happens to the property." Daniel relaxed visibly. "Mom, you don't need to worry about that. The house is in your name, but we all know it's staying in the family. We've talked about this." "Have we?" I asked, genuinely curious. "I don't recall ever discussing the transfer of the deed." Vanessa stepped forward, placing a manicured hand on my arm. Margaret, what Daniel means is that we assumed, given the family circumstances, the house would naturally pass to him eventually, especially since Claire is all the way in Australia and hasn't been involved in your care. My daughter Claire had moved to Sydney after graduate school, falling in love with both the country and an Australian marine biologist. We video called every month, and she invited me to visit every Christmas, though my fear of long flights had kept me from accepting. The way Vanessa mentioned her absence felt like an accusation. Claire calls me regularly, I said. And she has her own life to live. Of course she does, Daniel said quickly. But we're the ones here, helping you day to day. I looked around. The kitchen, at the sleek appliances that had replaced my reliable old ones, at the minimalist decor that had erased any trace of the home Thomas and I had built together, at the basement door that led to my current accommodations. Yes, I said quietly. You've been very helpful. Later that afternoon, I called my old friend Eleanor. We'd met in a community college art class 20 years ago and had maintained our friendship through my husband's death and her divorce. She'd been trying to get me to join her watercolor group at the community center for years. Margaret, she exclaimed when she heard my voice. Please tell me you're finally going to come paint with us on Thursday mornings. Actually, I said, I was wondering if your son is still practicing real estate law. Eleanor's son Michael had helped her navigate her divorce settlement, which had included property divisions. She'd mentioned more than once how his expertise had saved her from being taken advantage of by her ex-husband. He certainly is, Eleanor replied, curiosity evident in her tone. Why do you ask? As I explained my situation, being relegated to the basement, overhearing Vanessa's plans, their push for the retirement home, Eleanor's outrage grew audibly. They can't do that to you. It's your house, Margaret. Thomas left it to you. I know, I said, surprising myself with a small laugh. I think I just needed to hear someone else say it. Michael can see you tomorrow, Eleanor said firmly after a brief pause while she texted her son. I'm coming with you, and afterward, we're going to that new cafe on Poplar Street to plan your next steps. After I hung up, I sat on the edge of my basement mattress, looking at the small window where patches of blue sky were visible. For the first time since Thomas died, since Daniel and Vanessa moved in, since I found myself sleeping in the basement of my own home, I felt a fluttering sensation in my chest that I recognized, after a moment, as hope. Perhaps it wasn't too late to reclaim some part of the life I'd built. The independence I'd surrendered so gradually I hardly noticed it slipping away. Perhaps there was another chapter waiting for me beyond the basement walls. Eleanor's fierce loyalty had awakened something in me, a reminder that I existed beyond my role as Daniel's mother and Vanessa's inconvenient mother-in-law. I had been Margaret Wellington before I was anyone's mother or wife. Perhaps it was time to remember who that woman was. Michael's office was in a converted Victorian house, not unlike my own, though this one had been divided into professional suites. Eleanor and I sat in plush leather chairs across from his desk, while he reviewed the documents I'd brought: the deed, property tax statements, my late husband's will, and recent photos I'd taken of the basement where I now slept. Mrs. Wellington, legally speaking, your position is quite strong, Michael said, removing his reading glasses. The house is solely in your name since your husband's passing. You have complete authority to make decisions about the property. Even though Daniel and Vanessa have been living there? They've been paying some of the utilities, I added, not wanting to misrepresent anything. Contributing to household expenses doesn't grant ownership rights, Michael explained. Unless you've signed documents transferring partial ownership, which you haven't, they're essentially tenants, legally speaking. Eleanor squeezed my hand triumphantly. I told you, Margaret. Michael leaned forward, his expression serious. What concerns me more is your current living situation. You've been moved to an unfinished basement while they occupy the main house, a house that you own outright. That's problematic. I felt a strange mix of validation and embarrassment. Put in those terms, the arrangement sounded absurd. Why had I accepted it? I didn't want to make waves, I said quietly. Daniel is my only son. Michael nodded understandingly. Family dynamics complicate these situations. But Mrs. Wellington, you have options here. You could assert your rights as the homeowner and reclaim the main living space. You could establish a formal rental agreement with your son and daughter-in-law with clear boundaries. Or, I prompted. Or you could sell the property, he said simply. In this market, particularly in your neighborhood, you'd receive a substantial sum. Enough to secure comfortable housing for yourself and still have a significant amount left over. The thought had crossed my mind, but hearing it spoken aloud made it suddenly real. Sell the house. My house. Thomas's house. The home where we'd raised our children and built our lives. I couldn't do that to Daniel, I said automatically. He's expecting to inherit the house. They've already started renovations. Michael's expression remained neutral, but I detected a hint of concern. Mrs. Wellington, with all due respect, your son has moved you to the basement of your own home while making plans to relocate you to a retirement facility, without discussing these decisions with you as an equal. You need to consider what's best for your future. Eleanor patted my arm. Just think about it, Margaret. That's all Michael is saying. I nodded, gathering the documents as our meeting concluded. I felt both lighter and heavier leaving Michael's office. Lighter knowing I had legal ground to stand on. Heavier with the weight of decisions I now faced. As promised, Eleanor took me to the new cafe on Poplar Street afterward. It was modern and bright, with local artwork on the walls and the rich aroma of freshly ground coffee. We settled at a corner table with ceramic mugs and slices of lemon cake. You look a million miles away, Eleanor observed, stirring honey into her tea. I'm trying to imagine selling the house, I admitted. Every important memory I have is tied to that place. Thomas and I choosing the curtains for the nursery, Daniel taking his first steps in the living room, Claire learning to ride her bike in the driveway. And now you're sleeping in the basement, Eleanor reminded me gently. I sighed. When did I become this person, Eleanor? When did I start believing I deserved less than everyone else? Grief changes us, she said, reaching across to cover my hand with hers. After Thomas died, you needed Daniel. It's easy to slip into patterns where we think we're being selfless, when really we're just afraid of being alone. Outside the cafe window, autumn leaves spiraled down from the maple trees lining Poplar Street. They reminded me of the maple in my front yard, the tree Thomas and I had planted together, now partially obscured by Vanessa's sleek outdoor furniture. I should talk to Daniel, I said finally. Before I make any decisions, he deserves to hear my concerns directly. Eleanor nodded, though her expression suggested she had reservations. Just remember what Michael said. This is your life, Margaret. Your future. When I returned home that afternoon, the house was unusually quiet. Daniel's car wasn't in the driveway, but Vanessa's sleek silver SUV was parked in its usual spot. I entered through the front door, something I rarely did anymore, having grown accustomed to using the side entrance that led directly to the basement. I found Vanessa in the dining room, laptop open, surrounded by fabric swatches and paint samples. She looked up in surprise when I entered. Margaret, I didn't hear you come in. We've been using the side door lately. It's more convenient with the construction. More convenient for relegating me to the basement, I thought, but smiled politely. I was out with a friend. That's nice, she said, already returning her attention to her screen. Daniel's at a site visit. He won't be home for dinner. I approached the table, looking at the color palette she was considering. Cool grays and sterile whites. Nothing like the warm tones Thomas and I had chosen. Planning more renovations? Just finalizing the dining room refresh, she said, holding up a swatch of fabric. What do you think of this for new curtains? The current ones are a bit dated, I supplied. She had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I was going to say traditional. I ran my fingers over the heavy damask curtains that had hung in our dining room for 25 years. Thomas had helped me sew the hems on our old Singer machine, both of us laughing at his clumsy attempts to keep the stitches straight. Vanessa, I said carefully, I'd like to discuss something with you. She glanced at her watch. Can it wait until dinner? I have a Zoom call in 10 minutes with a client in London. Actually, no, I said, surprising both of us with my firmness. It's important. Vanessa closed her laptop reluctantly, giving me her full attention for perhaps the first time since she and Daniel had moved in. What is it? I'm not comfortable with my current living arrangement, I stated plainly. The basement is cold, it smells of mildew, and it's not an appropriate living space. Her expression flickered between surprise and calculation. We know it's not ideal, Margaret. That's why we've been researching retirement communities. You'd have a proper apartment at Sunny Pines with people your own age. I don't want to move to Sunny Pines, I said. This is my home, Vanessa. The deed is in my name. Thomas and I paid off this mortgage 15 years ago. Vanessa's posture stiffened. No one's disputing that the house is technically yours, Margaret. But we all agreed this arrangement made sense for everyone. Daniel and I need more space, especially if we start a family, and you need support as you get older. Did we agree? I asked, genuinely curious. I don't recall a conversation where I agreed to move to the basement permanently. It was temporary, she said quickly, until we found a better solution. Like Sunny Pines. Exactly. She seemed relieved. I understood. The brochures are on the coffee table. They have a fall promotion right now. If you move in before Thanksgiving, they waive the administrative fee. I took a deep breath. Vanessa, I'd like to propose a different arrangement. Her smile faltered slightly. What kind of arrangement? Before I could continue, the front door opened and Daniel called out, I'm home. The site visit finished early. He appeared in the dining room doorway, still in his work clothes, looking between Vanessa and me with growing concern. Everything okay? In here? Your mother was just about to propose a new living arrangement, Vanessa said, her voice carefully neutral. Daniel set his briefcase down, giving me his full attention. What did you have in mind, Mom? I hadn't planned to have this conversation with both of them simultaneously, but perhaps it was better this way. I want to reclaim the master bedroom, I said simply, and the main living areas. If you and Vanessa want to continue living here, you can use the 2 spare bedrooms upstairs. The silence that followed was absolute. Daniel's expression cycled through shock, confusion, and something like hurt. Vanessa's face had gone completely blank, her eyes cold. Mom, Daniel finally said, that doesn't make sense. We've already set up our home office in one of those bedrooms, and the other one is too small for us. Plus, you can't manage the stairs with your arthritis. I managed them for 68 years, I pointed out. I only stopped when you suggested I move to the basement. For your safety, he insisted. And we've put a lot of work into renovating the master suite. We've replaced the carpet, repainted, bought new furniture. Without asking me, I interrupted. This is still my house, Daniel. Vanessa stood abruptly. I think we all need to calm down. Margaret, I understand you're feeling unsettled, but you need to be practical. The retirement community is the best solution for everyone. Best for whom? I asked, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. Daniel moved to stand beside Vanessa, the two of them presenting a united front. Mom, we're trying to help you. All this stress isn't good for you. Why don't you look at the brochures and we can discuss this again when you're feeling more yourself? More myself? I echoed, a chill running through me at his dismissive tone. You know what he means, Vanessa said. You've been acting differently lately. Eleanor's always been a bit of a troublemaker. Did she put these ideas in your head? My son was studying me with a concern that felt patronizing rather than loving. "Mom, we only want what's best for you. Trust us." In that moment, looking at their faces, Vanessa's cool assessment, Daniel's condescending concern, I realized with crystal clarity that they didn't see me as a person with agency and rights. They saw me as a problem to be managed, an obstacle in their path to claiming my home as their own. The understanding was like ice water in my veins. All my hesitation about selling the house, all my guilt about potentially disappointing my son, evaporated in the face of that realization. "I understand perfectly," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Thank you for making things so clear." That night, I couldn't sleep. The thin mattress that I'd grown accustomed to felt suddenly intolerable. Each lump and depression a physical reminder of how far I'd allowed myself to be diminished. The basement's chill seemed to seep deeper into my bones than ever before, and the distant sound of Daniel and Vanessa moving around upstairs, in my bedroom, in my home, made my skin prickle with a quiet rage I hadn't felt in decades. I sat up, switched on the small lamp beside my makeshift bed, and looked around at what my life had become. A few cardboard boxes contained what remained of my personal possessions: photo albums, Thomas's watch, the quilt my grandmother had made. My clothes hung from a metal rack in the corner, my toiletries arranged on a plastic shelving unit from the hardware store. The walls were bare concrete, the ceiling crisscrossed with exposed pipes. This wasn't a mother helping her son and daughter-in-law. This was a woman who had surrendered her dignity piece by piece, convincing herself it was love. Around 2 a.m., I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the bottom drawer of the small dresser where I kept Thomas's things and pulled out the leather-bound journal he'd given me on our 30th anniversary. The pages were mostly empty. I'd written in it sporadically after his death, then abandoned it altogether when Daniel and Vanessa moved in. I found a pen and began to write, my handwriting shaky at first, but growing steadier with each line. Tonight, I realized that I've become a ghost in my own home. How did I let this happen? Thomas would be heartbroken to see me in this basement, to see what's become of the home we built together. I've been so afraid of being alone that I've allowed myself to be erased instead. The words poured out of me, years of unacknowledged hurt and frustration flowing onto the page. I wrote about Thomas, about our dreams for our golden years, about the garden we'd planned to expand once he retired. I wrote about the gradual way Daniel and Vanessa had claimed every inch of our home, remaking it in their image while relegating me, and all traces of the life Thomas and I had built, to the margins. By the time I set down the pen, dawnlight was beginning to filter through the small basement window. My eyes burned with exhaustion, but my mind felt clearer than it had in months. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a pale blue sweater Thomas had always loved, and the pearl earrings he'd given me for our 25th anniversary. I applied a touch of lipstick, something I'd stopped bothering with since moving to the basement, and brushed my silver hair until it shone. Upstairs, the kitchen was empty. A note on the refrigerator in Vanessa's precise handwriting informed me they'd gone to brunch with friends and would be back in the afternoon. The dismissive casualness of it, leaving without checking if I needed anything, without even saying goodbye, crystallized something in me. I picked up the phone and called Eleanor. "I need your help," I said when she answered. "Can you come over? And bring some empty boxes if you have them." Eleanor arrived 40 minutes later, her car trunk filled with flattened moving boxes and packing tape. Her eyes widened when she saw me standing in the doorway. "Margaret Wellington," she said with a low whistle. "You look like a woman on a mission." "I am," I replied, leading her inside. "We're going to pack up my things." Eleanor followed me down to the basement, her expression darkening as she took in my living conditions for the first time. "Oh, Margaret," she murmured. "I had no idea it was this bad." "Neither did I admitted. "Not until yesterday." We worked methodically, boxing up my clothes, books, and personal items. It didn't take long. I'd already been forced to downsize, significantly when I moved to the basement. The most precious items, Thomas's watch, our wedding album, Claire's childhood drawings, went into a special box that I labeled Memories in careful block letters. "So what's the plan?" Eleanor asked as we sealed the last box. "Are you moving in with me for a while? The guest room is yours for as long as you need it." I shook my head. "Thank you, but no. I've made other arrangements." After we loaded the boxes into Eleanor's car, I asked her to wait while I did one more thing. I walked through the house, my house, one room at a time. I ran my fingers along the banister Thomas had sanded and stained himself, looked out through the bay window where I'd watched 25 years of seasons change, stood in the doorway of Claire's old bedroom, now converted into Vanessa's immaculate home office. In the master bedroom, my bedroom, I opened the closet that had once held Thomas's suits alongside my dresses. Now it was filled with Daniel's expensive business attire and Vanessa's color-coded wardrobe. On the dresser, where Thomas's cologne had once stood beside my perfume, there were now only Vanessa's carefully arranged cosmetics and jewelry. I opened the top drawer of what had been Thomas's nightstand and slipped something inside, a sealed envelope with Daniel's name on it. Then I walked downstairs, took one last look around the living room, and left through the front door, locking it behind me. Eleanor was waiting in her car, watching me with a mixture of concern and admiration. "Are you sure about this, Margaret?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I replied, buckling my seatbelt. "Now, can you drop me at the Parkview Hotel downtown? I have a reservation." Eleanor's eyebrows shot up. "The Parkview? That's the fanciest hotel in town." I smiled, feeling a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. "I know. I booked their garden suite for a week." "A week at the Parkview must cost a fortune," Eleanor said as she pulled away from the curb. "It does," I agreed. "But I can afford it. I called Michael yesterday after my conversation with Daniel, and Vanessa. He's already drawn up the paperwork." Eleanor glanced at me, realization dawning on her face. "You're selling the house." "I am," I confirmed. "I've contacted a realtor who specializes in properties in our neighborhood. She's coming to the hotel tomorrow to discuss listing details." For a moment, Eleanor was silent. Then she reached over and squeezed my hand. "Thomas would be proud of you, Margaret." Tears pricked at my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They felt cleansing, like the first rain after a long drought. "I think he would." At the hotel, the young woman at the reception desk smiled warmly as she checked me in. "Mrs. Wellington, we have you in the garden suite for 7 nights. Will you be needing any assistance with luggage?" "My friend is bringing in a few boxes," I explained, "but I can manage the rest." "Of course. And will anyone be joining you during your stay?" I thought about Daniel and Vanessa returning home to find me gone, finding the envelope in the nightstand drawer. I thought about the look on their faces when they realized what I'd done. "No," I said with a smile. "It's just me." The garden suite was on the 3rd floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the hotel's immaculate gardens. The king-sized bed was piled with plush pillows, the bathroom stocked with luxurious toiletries, and a welcome basket containing wine, cheese, and fresh fruit sat on the elegant writing desk. After Eleanor helped bring up my boxes and left with a promise to call later, I sat in the armchair by the window, watching the gardeners tend to the late autumn flowers below. The afternoon sun warmed my face through the glass, and for the first time in years, I felt truly present in my own body, in my own life. I took out my phone and dialed my daughter's number in Australia. Despite the time difference, Claire answered on the second ring. "Mom? Is everything okay? You never call this late?" "Everything's fine, sweetheart," I assured her. "Better than fine, actually. I've made some changes." "Changes? What kind of changes?" Her voice held a note of concern. "I've moved out of the house," I said. "I'm staying at the Parkview Hotel for now." "The Parkview?" Claire echoed. sounding as surprised as Eleanor had been. "Mom, what's going on? Did something happen with Daniel and Vanessa?" I gazed out at the gardens, watching a hummingbird hover near a late-blooming salvia. It's a long story, but the short version is that I'm taking back control of my life. Starting with selling the house. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. "You're selling the house? But that's your home. You and Dad built that life together." "The house is just walls and a roof, Claire," I said gently. "The life your father and I built is in here." I tapped my chest, even though she couldn't see the gesture. "And it's time for me to build a new chapter." "Mom," Claire's voice was thick with emotion, "I'm so proud of you, and a little worried, and also kicking myself for not visiting more often. I should have seen what was happening." "Don't blame yourself," I said firmly. "I didn't even see it myself until recently." After we hung up, I unpacked a few essential items, then lay down on the sumptuous hotel bed. The sheets were cool and crisp, the mattress perfectly supportive, a far cry from the thin pad on the basement floor. I closed my eyes, expecting to feel a pang of guilt or regret about my decision. Instead, I felt only peace, and the quiet certainty that I had finally, after years of diminishing myself, chosen my own well-being. In the stillness of the garden, sweet, with no one's needs to consider but my own, I drifted into the most restful sleep I'd had since Thomas died. My phone began ringing at 6:45 the next morning. Daniel's name flashed on the screen, followed immediately by a text message. "Mom, where are you? Call me ASAP." I silenced the ringer and set the phone aside. This was my time now. I ordered room service breakfast, something I'd never done before in my life. The young waiter who delivered it smiled as he arranged the silver-domed plates on the small table by the window. "Beautiful view, isn't it, ma'am?" he said, gesturing to the gardens below, where the morning light illuminated the autumn foliage. "It certainly is," I agreed, tipping him generously. Another new experience. After he left, I savored every bite of my eggs Benedict and fresh fruit, taking my time with the rich coffee. No need to hurry, no one to accommodate but myself. My phone continued to buzz periodically, but I ignored it. Whatever Daniel had to say could wait until I was ready to hear it. At 10 a.m. sharp, there was a knock at my door. Olivia Chen, the realtor Michael had recommended, stood in the hallway with a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. "Mrs. Wellington? I'm Olivia Chen from Landmark Realty. Thank you for meeting with me." She was younger than I'd expected, perhaps, in her early 40s, dressed in a tailored burgundy suit that spoke of quiet confidence. As we settled at the table near the window, she opened her portfolio and removed several documents. "I've done some preliminary research on your property," she began. "Based on recent sales in your neighborhood and the size and age of your home, I believe we can list it for significantly more than you might expect." She slid a paper across the table with a number that made my breath catch. It was nearly triple what Thomas and I had paid for the house. "That's substantial," I managed. Olivia nodded. "The Maple Grove area has become one of the most desirable neighborhoods in the city. Historical homes with character like yours are in high demand, especially with the large lot and established landscaping." "It needs some work," I admitted. "The kitchen is outdated, and the basement—" "In this market, most buyers will expect to make some updates," she assured me. "They're looking for good bones and location, which your home certainly has. And your proximity to the new tech campus has driven prices up considerably." We spent the next hour discussing listing strategies, potential showing timelines, and what paperwork I would need to proceed. When Olivia asked if I had any questions, I hesitated only briefly. "What if my son contests the sale? He and his wife have been living in the house." Olivia glanced at her notes. Michael Fairchild mentioned this situation. "From a legal standpoint, if the property is solely in your name, your son has no grounds to prevent a sale. Do they have a formal lease or rental agreement? No, nothing. Like that. Then they're essentially guests in your home. You would, of course, need to follow proper procedures for giving notice to vacate, but that's something Michael can help you navigate. After Olivia left, I sat looking at the listing agreement she'd left for my review. My signature on that paper would irrevocably alter my relationship with Daniel. It would be a declaration that I valued my own future above his expectations. My phone buzzed again, Vanessa this time. A text message appeared. Margaret, this is childish and inconsiderate. Daniel is worried sick. Where are you? I picked up the phone and for the first time that day I replied, I'm perfectly fine. I've decided to stay at the Parkview Hotel for a while to consider my options. Please respect my privacy. Almost immediately, my phone rang. Daniel again. This time, I answered. Mom, what's going on? We came home yesterday and found your things gone. Are you okay? Why are you at a hotel? His voice carried notes of both concern and irritation, the tone of someone inconvenienced rather than genuinely worried. I'm fine, Daniel, I said calmly. I needed some space to think. Think about what? Is this about what you said yesterday? Mom, you know Vanessa and I only want what's best for you. The basement situation is temporary. The basement situation, I interrupted, is over. I'm not coming back to sleep in the basement of my own home. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then, in a more measured tone, Okay, I understand you're upset. Why don't you come home and we can talk about different arrangements? Maybe we could convert the sunroom into a bedroom for you. It's on the ground floor. No stairs to worry about. That's not what I want, Daniel. Then what do you want? A hint of exasperation crept into his voice. I looked down at the listing. Agreement on the table in front of me. I want to move forward with my life in a way that honors who I am now. What does that even mean? Mom, you're not making sense. Vanessa thinks Eleanor has been filling your head with strange ideas. I almost laughed at that. The notion that I couldn't possibly have formed my own opinions, that someone else must be manipulating me. It was so perfectly aligned with how they'd been treating me for months. Daniel, I found the brochures for Sunny Pines in Vanessa's desk drawer. They were dated 3 months ago with notes about my transition timeline. You've been planning to move me to a retirement home while redesigning my house for yourselves. Another silence, longer this time. We were exploring options, he finally said, his voice defensive. For your benefit, the house is too much for you to manage alone. I'm not alone, Daniel. I have friends, I have resources, and I have the legal right to decide what happens to my property. Your property? His tone sharpened. So that's what this is about, the house? Mom, we always understood that the house would stay in the family. Dad would have wanted. Don't tell me what your father would have wanted, I cut in, my voice steady but firm. Thomas wanted me to be happy and respected, neither of which I've been lately. A shuffling sound came through the phone, and then Vanessa's voice replaced Daniel's. Margaret, this has gone far enough. You're upsetting Daniel and frankly behaving irrationally. Come home, and we can all discuss this calmly. Vanessa, I said, I am perfectly rational. I'm 68 years old, not 8. I don't need your permission to make decisions about my life. Of course not, she said with forced patience. But you do need support. Your arthritis is getting worse, you've been forgetful lately, and living alone just isn't practical anymore. Her condescension crystallized something in me. This was the moment, the point of no return. I've decided to sell the house, I stated simply. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Vanessa's voice, suddenly sharp with panic. You can't do that. I can and I am. I've already met with a realtor this morning. Daniel! I heard her call away from the phone. She's trying to sell the house. There was a commotion on the other end, and Daniel's voice returned, higher pitch than normal. "Mom, you can't be serious. That's our family home." "It's my home, Daniel. My name is on the deed." "But what about us? Where are we supposed to go? We've put thousands into renovations." "Without consulting me," I reminded him. "I'll be listing the house in 2 weeks. You and Vanessa should start looking for a new place to live." "This is insane." His voice was nearly a shout now. "You can't just sell the house out from under us. We're your family." "Yes, you are," I agreed. "And family should treat each other with respect." I heard Vanessa in the background, her voice urgent. "Tell her we'll contest it. She can't do this to us." Daniel came back on, his tone suddenly attempting reasonableness. "Mom, let's not be hasty. Come home and we can talk this through. I'm sure we can find a solution that works for everyone." "I've found my solution," I said. "I'll be by tomorrow to collect some additional personal items. Please make sure you're both there." "Mom," I ended the call, my hand trembling slightly, but my mind clear. I picked up the listing agreement and signed my name, Margaret Wellington, in firm, dark strokes. Then I called Olivia Chen to tell her I was ready to proceed. That evening, Eleanor came by the hotel with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. We sat in the comfortable chairs by the window, watching as the garden lights came on one by one in the growing dusk. "So you told them," she said. Not a question but a statement. I nodded, taking a sip of wine. "I did." "And how do you feel?" I considered the question carefully. "Lighter," I finally said. "Like I've set down a heavy burden I've been carrying for years without realizing it." "Good," Eleanor said firmly. "It's about time." They didn't take it well. She snorted. "I didn't expect they would. People rarely applaud when you stop allowing them to take advantage of you." I gazed out at the twilight garden, where a few late roses still bloomed against the approaching winter. I've spent my whole life trying to make others comfortable, even at my own expense. First my parents, then Thomas, then the children, always putting myself last. And now? Now I'm putting myself first. It feels unfamiliar, but right. Eleanor raised her glass. To Margaret Wellington, finally claiming her due. We clinked glasses, and I felt something expand in my chest, a sense of possibility I hadn't experienced in decades. "Tomorrow will be difficult," I acknowledged. Going back to the house, facing them both. "Do you want me to come with you?" Eleanor offered. I shook my head. "No. This is something I need to do myself." As I prepared for bed that night, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me stood straighter than she had in years, her eyes clear and determined. I hardly recognized her, this woman who had signed away her family home without flinching, who had faced down her son's anger and her daughter-in-law's manipulation. Yet she was more familiar to me than the faded woman who had meekly accepted relegation to a basement. She reminded me of someone I'd almost forgotten, the young Margaret who had stood beside Thomas all those years ago, ready to build a life on her own terms. I smiled at my reflection. "Hello again," I whispered. "It's been a long time." I arrived at the house precisely at 10 the next morning, just as I'd told Daniel I would. The familiarity of the front walkway, the uneven brick that Thomas had always meant to fix, the hydrangea, bushes I'd planted when Claire was born, struck me with unexpected force. For a moment I hesitated at the bottom of the porch steps, my hand clutching the handrail that Thomas had installed when his mother came to live with us briefly in her final years. This had been home for so long. Was I really prepared to let it go? Before I could reconsider, the front door swung open. Daniel stood there, looking tired and rumpled in a way I rarely saw him. His usual polished appearance had given way to day-old stubble and a creased shirt. "Mom," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "Come in." The living room had been tidied, evidence of Vanessa's nervous energy, no doubt. The couch pillows were perfectly arranged, magazines fanned precisely on the coffee table. Vanessa herself was perched on the edge of the armchair, dressed immaculately in contrast to Daniel's dishevelment, her posture rigid with tension. "Margaret," she acknowledged with a tight nod. "We've been expecting you." "Where would you like to start?" Daniel asked, gesturing vaguely around the room. "If you're here to collect things, I mean." "The attic," I said. "There are several family heirlooms I want to retrieve." Daniel's eyebrows rose slightly. "The attic? Mom, those stairs are steep. Your knees—" "My knees will manage," I interrupted. "They managed fine for 68 years before you decided they couldn't." Vanessa shot Daniel a meaningful look that seemed to say, "See what I mean?" He cleared his throat. "At least let me help you." I nodded, not because I needed his help, but because I wasn't above letting him do the heavy lifting. We climbed the stairs in silence, Daniel a step behind me as if ready to catch me should I stumble. At the top landing, he reached past me to pull down the attic access ladder. The attic was dusty and dim, illuminated only by a small window at the far end. Cardboard boxes and old furniture created a labyrinth of family history. I moved purposefully toward a stack of containers labeled "Family Photos and Documents" in Thomas's neat block lettering. "These first," I instructed, pointing to 3 boxes. "And that trunk in the corner, it has your grandmother's wedding china." Daniel pulled down the boxes one by one, opening each to check the contents before carrying them downstairs. When he reached for the trunk, he paused. "Mom, why are you doing this? Why now?" I met his gaze directly. "Because I finally realized I've spent too long living according to what others think I need, rather than what I actually want." "And what is it you want?" he asked, a hint of bitterness in his voice. "To upset our lives? To punish Vanessa and me for trying to help you?" "No, Daniel," I said gently. "I want what everyone wants, to be treated with dignity, to have my wishes respected, to make my own choices while I still can." He looked away, hefting the trunk with a grunt. "We were trying to do what's best for you." Without asking me what I thought was best. He had no answer for that. When we returned to the living room, Vanessa was on her phone, speaking in a hushed, urgent tone. She ended the call abruptly when she saw us. "I've been doing some research," she announced, setting her phone down with deliberate calm. "Margaret, did you know that selling a house requires disclosing any issues, structural problems, water damage, mental competency concerns?" Daniel shot her a warning look. "Vanessa, no. Daniel, we need to be practical here," she insisted, turning back to me. "Margaret, we're worried about you. This sudden decision, the impulsive hotel stay, the talk about selling the family home, it doesn't seem like you're thinking clearly." I set down the photo album I'd been examining. "Are you suggesting I'm not mentally competent, Vanessa? Hra?" Backpedaled slightly. "I'm suggesting that grief can have long-term effects. You never really processed Thomas's death, and now you're making drastic decisions that affect all of us." "Interesting," I said mildly. "And when did you get your psychology degree?" Daniel intervened. "Mom, what Vanessa means is that we're concerned. This seems out of character for you." "Out of character?" I repeated. "Or simply inconvenient for—" "You both?" The doorbell rang, interrupting the tense exchange. Daniel frowned, checking his watch. "Are you expecting someone?" "Yes," I said. "My lawyer." The look that passed between Daniel and Vanessa confirmed my suspicions. They'd been planning to pressure me into reconsidering, perhaps even trying to establish grounds for questioning my mental competency. Daniel opened the door to reveal Michael Fairchild, briefcase in hand. His professional demeanor seemed to fill the doorway, instantly changing the dynamic in the room. "Mrs. Wellington?" He greeted me with a nod. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," I assured him. "Please come in. Michael, this is my son." Daniel and his wife Vanessa. Michael shook hands with Daniel, his grip firm. We've spoken on the phone. So Daniel had already contacted him, another confirmation that today's concerned conversation had been carefully planned. Mr. Fairchild has been advising me on the house sale, I explained, gesturing for Michael to take a seat at the dining table. About that, Daniel began, his tone shifting to one I recognized from his business negotiations. We've been discussing options that might work better for everyone involved. Michael opened his briefcase, removing several folders. I'd be interested to hear these options. Vanessa leaned forward, her voice honeyed with reasonableness. We think Margaret's desire for more independence is completely understandable. Perhaps we could convert the garage into a proper in-law suite, separate entrance, full kitchen, complete privacy. At considerable expense, Daniel added, but we're willing to invest in a solution that keeps the family together and the house in the family. Michael glanced at me, awaiting my response. The garage conversion was actually my suggestion 6 months ago, I noted. You both said it would be too expensive and impractical. Vanessa flushed slightly. Well, we've reconsidered. Family is worth the investment? Indeed it is, Michael agreed pleasantly. Though I must point out that Mrs. Wellington has already signed a listing agreement with Landmark Realty. The property will be officially on the market next week. Daniel's expression hardened. Those agreements can be canceled. They can, Michael acknowledged. But Mrs. Wellington has been quite clear about her wishes. Her wishes, Vanessa repeated, her voice taking on an edge. And what about Daniel's wishes? This was his childhood home. His father intended for him to have it. Actually, I interjected, Thomas and I never discussed leaving the house specifically to Daniel. Our will divided our assets equally between Daniel and Claire. Claire hasn't been home in years, Vanessa exclaimed. She's built her life in Australia. She doesn't care about this house. Perhaps not, I agreed. But that doesn't automatically mean it goes to you and Daniel. Daniel pushed back from the table, pacing to the window and back. This is ridiculous. We've been living here helping maintain the property, making improvements. Renovations you chose without consulting me, I pointed out. Changes that erased the home Thomas and I built together. We were modernizing an outdated house. Michael cleared his throat. If I may, it seems there's been a fundamental misunderstanding here. Mrs. Wellington owns this property outright. Any improvements made without her explicit agreement were done at your own risk. Vanessa's composure finally cracked. This is so typical, she snapped. You've always resented me, haven't you, Margaret? I've tried for years to be a good daughter-in-law, to include you. And this is how you repay us? By making us homeless? You're hardly homeless, I replied evenly. You both have good jobs and savings. You can find another place to live. Another place to live, Daniel echoed hollowly. After we've put thousands into renovating this one. Michael withdrew a document from his folder. I've prepared a formal notice to vacate. According to state law, you have 30 days from today. 30 days? Vanessa's voice rose an octave. That's impossible. Where are we supposed to go on such short notice? The Parkview Hotel has lovely suites, I suggested, unable to resist the small jab. Daniel slammed his hand on the table. This isn't funny, Mom. You're upending our lives because what? You had to sleep in the basement for a few months? We were trying to help you. By moving me to a retirement home without my consent. By treating me like I was incapable of making my own decisions? I kept my voice calm, though my heart was racing. That's not help, Daniel. That's control. Vanessa stood abruptly. I need some air. She stormed out the front door, letting it slam behind her. Daniel and I stared at each other across the table, the weight of decades between us. In his face, I could still see traces of the little boy who had once clung to my hand on his first day of kindergarten, terrified to let go. I never thought you'd do something like this, he said quietly. Dad would be so disappointed. The words were calculated to wound, and they did. But not in the way Daniel intended. What hurt wasn't the accusation itself, but the realization that my son could use his father's memory as a weapon against me. Your father, I said carefully, valued fairness and honesty above all else. He wouldn't have approved of how you and Vanessa have treated me. Daniel looked away, a muscle working in his jaw. So that's it? You're really going through with this? Michael began gathering his papers. I believe Mrs. Wellington has made her position clear. I'll leave this notice with you formally, though the 30 days starts from today regardless. And where will you go? Daniel asked me, ignoring Michael. Once you sell the house? The money won't last forever, Mom. I smiled slightly. I'm not as financially naive as you seem to think, Daniel. Thomas and I saved carefully. Between the proceeds from the house sale, my retirement account, and Social Security, I'll be perfectly comfortable. In a retirement home, he said bitterly. Exactly where you claimed you didn't want to be. Not necessarily, I replied. I'm considering several options. The difference is that now, the choice will be mine. Michael stood, briefcase in hand. Mrs. Wellington, shall I wait for you in the car? Take all the time you need. I nodded gratefully. After he left, Daniel and I sat in silence for several long moments. Outside, through the bay window, I could see Vanessa pacing on the front lawn, phone pressed to her ear. She's calling her parents, Daniel explained, following my gaze. They might let us stay with them temporarily. I felt a pang of something, not quite regret, but a sadness for the rift that had opened between us. I never wanted this kind of estrangement, Daniel. He met my eyes, his own damp with emotion. Then why are you doing it? Because sometimes standing up for yourself means others won't like the boundaries you set, I said gently. I raised you to be independent, to make your own way in the world. I need to follow that same advice now. By punishing us? No, I sighed. By refusing to be punished myself for the crime of growing older, but still wanting autonomy. I stood, gathering my purse and the photo album I'd set aside earlier. I'll arrange to have the rest of these boxes picked up next week. Please don't dispose of anything else of mine without asking first. At the doorway, I paused, looking back at my son, still seated at the table, shoulders slumped in defeat. I love you, Daniel. That hasn't changed. He didn't respond, and I didn't wait for him to. Some wounds would take time to heal, if they ever did. But as I walked down the front path toward Michael's waiting car, past Vanessa still arguing frantically into her phone, I felt the strangest sensation, like invisible ties that had bound me for years were finally falling away, leaving me lighter with each step. The drive back to the Parkview Hotel was silent. Michael kept his eyes on the road, occasionally glancing at me with concern, but respecting my need for quiet contemplation. The enormity of what I'd just done, confronting my son, formally beginning the process of selling my family home, settled over me like a physical weight. Not a burden, exactly, but the palpable presence of significant change. Are you all right, Mrs. Wellington? Michael finally asked as we pulled into the hotel driveway. Yes, I said, surprised to discover it was true. It was difficult, but necessary. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. These situations rarely resolve neatly. Family dynamics have a way of complicating even the most straightforward legal matters. Will there be issues with the sale? I asked. Daniel seemed so certain he could prevent it. Michael shook his head. The property is solely in your name. They might attempt to claim partial ownership based on their contributions to renovations, but without formal documentation, such claims rarely succeed. He hesitated before adding, the more concerning possibility is what you mentioned earlier, attempts to question your competency. A chill ran through me. You think they might actually pursue that? It's a common tactic when adult children disagree with an elderly parent's financial decisions, he said carefully. Not that 68 is particularly elderly, he added, with a small smile, but the courts sometimes have outdated views on these matters. What should I do? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Continue making rational, documented decisions. Maintain your social connections. Perhaps consider a cognitive assessment with your doctor, proactively establishing your competency rather than defending it retroactively. He handed me his card. And call me immediately if they make any further suggestions about your mental state. After thanking Michael, I made my way to my suite. The hotel room felt like a sanctuary after the tension of the morning, neutral territory, where no memories lurked in the corners, no expectations pressed against my shoulders. I kicked off my shoes and lay on the bed, staring at the ornate ceiling. My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. How did it go? Need reinforcements? I smiled at her message, appreciating her unwavering support. Better than expected, worse than hoped, I replied. I'll tell you over dinner? Eleanor's response came immediately. Absolutely. 7 p.m. in the hotel restaurant. I'm bringing champagne. I set the phone aside and closed my eyes, suddenly exhausted. The emotional labor of the morning caught up with me all at once, and I drifted into a dreamless afternoon nap. When I woke, the room was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. I took a long shower, letting the hot water soothe my tense muscles, and dressed carefully in a navy blue dress I'd packed, one of the few nicer items I'd brought with me from the basement. The hotel restaurant was elegant without being intimidating, with soft lighting and tables spaced far enough apart for private conversation. Eleanor was already waiting, a bottle of champagne chilling beside her. You look wonderful, she declared as I took my seat. There's a spark in your eyes I haven't seen in years. Is that what freedom looks like? I asked with a small laugh. Freedom and righteous indignation, a powerful combination. She gestured to the waiter to pour the champagne. So, tell me everything. I recounted the morning's events, from Daniel's disheveled appearance to Vanessa's thinly veiled threats about my mental competency, to Michael's steady presence through it all. Eleanor listened intently, occasionally shaking her head or muttering, under her breath. The nerve of them, she said when I finished. Questioning your competency because you finally stood up for yourself? If anything, it shows you're thinking more clearly than you have in years. That's essentially what Michael said, I replied, taking a sip of champagne. The bubbles tickled my nose, effervescent as my new sense of possibility. But he warned me they might try to fight the sale. Eleanor scoffed. Let them try. The house is yours, Margaret. You and Thomas paid for it, maintained it, filled it with love for decades. They have no legal claim to it. It's not the legal aspect that bothers me, I admitted. It's that Daniel truly believes I'm betraying him somehow, that I've turned against my family. You're not betraying anyone by refusing to be erased, Eleanor said firmly. They're the ones who betrayed your trust when they relegated you to the basement and planned to ship you off to Sunny Pines without your consent. The waiter appeared to take our orders, momentarily interrupting our conversation. After he left, Eleanor leaned forward, her expression softening. What happens next? She asked. After the house sells? It was the question I'd been turning over in my mind since making my decision. I'm not entirely sure, I admitted. I know what I don't want. I don't want to be dependent on Daniel and Vanessa, or to live in a place where my autonomy is gradually stripped away. But beyond that, you have options, Eleanor reminded me. With the proceeds from the house, you could buy a small condo, maybe in that new development near the community center, or rent for a while until you decide. There's no rush. The idea of renting felt strange after decades of home ownership, but it also held a certain appeal. The freedom to change my mind, to explore different neighborhoods, to find a place that fit who I was now rather than who I'd been for the past 40 years. Claire called again this afternoon, I said, changing the subject slightly. She offered to fly in next week to help with the house sorting. That's wonderful, Eleanor exclaimed. It's been what, 2 years since her last visit? 3, I corrected. Not since Thomas's funeral. I twisted my wedding ring, a habit I'd never broken. She's worried about the rift with Daniel. They've never been particularly close, but she hates the thought of the family being divided. Families adapt, Eleanor said wisely. Daniel will come around eventually when he realizes you're not backing down. Men like him always do. They huff and puff until they realize the house isn't going to blow down. Then they adjust their expectations. I smiled at her metaphor. I hope you're right. I don't want to lose my son over this. You haven't lost him, she assured me. You've just changed the terms of your relationship. That's healthy, Margaret, even if it's painful right now. Our meals arrived, and we shifted to lighter topics. Eleanor's watercolor class, the upcoming community theater production she'd auditioned for, the latest gossip from our neighborhood book club. It felt wonderfully normal, this dinner with a friend, discussing everyday matters as if my life hadn't just been upended. Later, as we lingered over coffee and shared a slice of chocolate cake, Eleanor asked, Have you thought about what you want to do with yourself, beyond the housing question? You're only 68, Margaret. You could have decades ahead of you. The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on what I was leaving behind that I'd barely considered what I might be moving toward. I'm not sure, I said slowly. I used to love gardening, but that feels tied to the house somehow. Container gardening exists, Eleanor pointed out, and community garden plots. You don't need a yard to grow things. True, I acknowledged. I also enjoyed my volunteer work at the library before Thomas got sick. I'd spent 2 afternoons a week reading to children in the library's story hour program, something I'd set aside during Thomas's illness and never resumed. They'd welcome you back in a heartbeat, Eleanor said. Mary Harris still runs the children's department, and she's always lamenting the lack of consistent volunteers. The thought sent a small thrill through me, the children's eager faces, the texture of picture book pages beneath my fingers, the satisfaction of introducing young minds to the magic of stories. It was something entirely mine, unconnected to my identity as a wife or mother. Maybe I will call Mary, I said, feeling a new seed of purpose taking root alongside my newfound independence. As we finished our meal and prepared to part ways for the evening, Eleanor embraced me tightly. I'm proud of you, she whispered. What you're doing takes tremendous courage. Does it? I wondered aloud. Sometimes it feels more like desperation than courage. The two aren't mutually exclusive, she said wisely. The most courageous acts often come when we've reached the end of our willingness to endure. Back in my suite, I stood at the window overlooking the hotel gardens, now illuminated by soft landscape lighting. The late autumn flowers were mostly gone, but the structured beauty of the bare branches and evergreens held its own austere appeal. I thought about seasons of life, how the vibrant blooms of youth gave way to the stark clarity of later years, each with its own particular beauty. My phone buzzed with a text message. I steeled myself, expecting another message from Daniel or Vanessa, but instead saw Claire's name on the screen. Booked my flight, arriving Tuesday. We'll face this together, Mom. Love you. I held the phone to my chest, tears springing to my eyes, not tears of sadness, but of gratitude. Change was coming, whether I was ready or not, but I wouldn't face it alone. Claire arrived at the airport looking both familiar and foreign. My daughter, yet someone I hardly recognized. Her Australian life had tanned her skin and lightened her hair, and something in her carriage spoke of a confidence I didn't remember, her possessing before she left. When she spotted me in the arrivals area, her face lit up with a smile so like her father's that my heart caught. Mom, she called, rushing toward me with her carry-on bag bouncing behind her. She enveloped me in a hug that smelled of airplane recycled air and something tropical. Coconut, perhaps, or some Australian flower I couldn't name. You look wonderful, I said, holding her at arm's length to examine her properly. The Australian? Son agrees with you. And you look different, she replied, studying me just as intently. Good different. Stronger somehow. Homelessness becomes me, apparently, I joked, and was rewarded with her surprised laugh. Hotel living is hardly homeless, she countered as we made our way to the parking lot where Eleanor had lent me her car. Though I still can't believe you're actually selling the house. When you called, I thought maybe you were just threatening to get Daniel and Vanessa in line. I unlocked Eleanor's sensible sedan and helped Claire load her luggage into the trunk. It started that way, perhaps, I admitted as we settled into the car. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it was the right decision regardless of their behavior. Claire buckled her seatbelt, her expression turning serious. Tell me everything, from the beginning. Your emails were pretty sparse on details. As I navigated the mid-morning traffic back toward the hotel, I filled Claire in on the gradual deterioration of my living situation, the basement bedroom, the overheard dinner party conversation, my realization that Daniel and Vanessa had been planning to move me to Sunny Pines without my input. Claire's expression darkened with each revelation. I knew something was off, she said when I paused. Your video calls for the past year have been from the basement, but you always made excuses about better internet connection down there. I should have pushed harder. It's not your responsibility to monitor my living conditions, I assured her, turning into the hotel's elegant circular driveway. You have your own life in Australia. You're part of my life, Mom, she insisted as we pulled to a stop. Distance doesn't change that. The valet approached to take the car keys, and we made our way into the lobby, Claire's eyes widening as she took in the hotel's luxury. Wow. When you said you were staying at the Parkview, I pictured something more modest. I smiled, feeling an unexpected flash of pride at her surprise. I decided if I was going to upend my life, I might as well do it in style. Good for you, she said with genuine approval. Dad would love this. He always said you deserved the finest things. The mention of Thomas sent a familiar pang through my chest, but it wasn't the debilitating grief of the early years after his death. More like the gentle ache of a well-healed wound, present but manageable. Up in my suite, Claire set her bags down and immediately went to the window to admire the view of the gardens. This is gorgeous, Mom. I can see why you're in no hurry to find a new permanent place. The novelty of room service hasn't worn off yet, I admitted, settling into one of the armchairs. But I'll need to decide on something more permanent soon. The listing for the house goes live tomorrow. Claire turned from the window, her expression sobering. Have you heard from Daniel since you gave them notice? Only through his lawyer, I replied, the words still tasting strange in my mouth. My son, communicating with me through legal channels. He's demanding compensation for the renovations they made to the house. Michael, my lawyer, says it's a standard negotiating tactic. Nothing to worry about. Claire shook her head, disbelief, etched on her features. I still can't wrap my mind around Daniel treating you this way. He was always so, I don't know, proper, responsible. People change, I said, more to convince myself than her. Or perhaps they reveal who they truly are when circumstances shift. And Vanessa? Claire asked, taking the chair opposite mine. Any communication from her? Not directly, but according to Eleanor, who heard it from her book club friend whose daughter works at Daniel's firm, Vanessa has been telling people I'm having cognitive issues. The betrayal still stung, even after weeks to process it. Apparently, I'm imagining slights and making irrational decisions because of early dementia. Claire's expression hardened in a way that reminded me forcefully of Thomas when his sense of justice was provoked. That's despicable, and potentially slander. Michael says not to engage with the rumors. The best refutation is my continued Independence and clear decision-making. I paused, then added, "We're meeting with the realtor this afternoon to review the listing. Would you like to come?" "Absolutely," Claire said firmly. "I want to understand everything that's happening." And she hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "I'd like to go by the house once more before it sells, to say goodbye." I nodded, understanding completely. "We can do that. Daniel and Vanessa both work during the day. We could go tomorrow morning." "Do you think that's wise? Going when they're not there?" Claire asked, concern evident in her voice. "It's still my house," I reminded her. "I have every right to enter it, and I need to check on the condition of the things I left behind." Claire seemed to accept this, though a small crease remained between her eyebrows. "What about afterward, after the house sells? Have you thought about what comes next?" It was the same question Eleanor had asked, and I still didn't have a clear answer. "I'm considering my options," I said. "A condo, perhaps, or a small garden apartment. Something manageable, but with enough space for when you visit." "Or," Claire said, her voice taking on a careful neutrality that immediately alerted me she was about to suggest something significant. "You could come to Australia. Not permanently," she added quickly, seeing my expression. "Just for an extended visit. A few months, maybe. Give yourself time to figure out your next steps without rushing into another property purchase." The suggestion caught me off guard. In all our years of separation, I'd never seriously considered visiting Claire in Australia. The distance had seemed insurmountable, the journey too daunting. "I don't know," I hedged. "That's such a long flight, and I'd be so far from everything familiar." "Sometimes unfamiliar is exactly what we need," Claire countered gently. "A complete change of perspective. No history, no expectations. Just new experiences and possibilities." She made it sound so simple, so freeing. But the thought of leaving everything I knew, even after deciding to sell my home, created a fluttering anxiety in my chest. "Think about it," Claire urged, seeing my hesitation. "No pressure. My guest room is available whenever you want it for as long as you want. Mark and the kids would be thrilled to have you." I promised to consider it, though in truth I couldn't imagine myself on the other side of the world, living in Claire's bustling household with her marine biologist husband and their two energetic children whom I'd only met through video calls. Our meeting with Olivia Chen at Landmark Realty that afternoon was straightforward and encouraging. The professional photographs of the house had been edited to showcase its best features: the bay window in the kitchen, the original woodwork in the living room, the mature landscaping in the yard. "We're listing at the price we discussed," Olivia confirmed, showing us the final marketing materials on her tablet. "Given the current market and your home's location, I expect multiple offers within the first week." Claire studied the listing photos with a strange expression, part nostalgia, part detachment. "It looks beautiful," she admitted. "Smaller than I remember, but beautiful." "Professional photos always make spaces look their best," Olivia said with a knowing smile. "But your mother's home truly is a gem. The original features alone will attract serious buyers who appreciate craftsmanship." We signed the final paperwork, and just like that, my home of 40 years would officially be on the market by morning. The reality of it pressed against my ribs, not painfully, but with sufficient weight to make me aware of each breath. "Are you okay?" Claire asked quietly as we left Olivia's office. "Yes," I said, surprised to find it was true. "It feels right. Difficult, but right." That evening, we met Eleanor for dinner at a small Italian restaurant near the hotel. She and Claire had always gotten along well, united in their protective attitudes toward me, and they fell back into easy camaraderie over pasta and wine. "So, Australia," Eleanor said after Claire mentioned her invitation. "That would be quite an adventure, Margaret." "An adventure or an escape?" I mused, twirling linguine around my fork. "Does it matter which?" Eleanor countered. Either way, it's a choice you're making for yourself, which is the whole point of this new chapter. Claire raised her wine glass. To new chapters, she proposed, and to my mother, finally writing her own story. Eleanor clinked her glass against Claire's, both of them looking at me expectantly. I raised my own glass, feeling a curious mixture of trepidation and excitement. To new chapters, I echoed, the words both a toast and a quiet promise to myself. Later, as Claire and I walked back to the hotel through the crisp autumn evening, she linked her arm through mine in a gesture that reminded me of our shopping trips when she was a teenager. I've missed you, Mom, she said simply. More than I realized until I got here. I've missed you too, I replied, squeezing her arm. Video calls aren't the same? No, they're not, she agreed. Which is another argument for visiting Australia. Real hugs from your grandchildren might be nice for a change. I laughed softly. You're persistent. I'll give you that. I come by it honestly, she said with a sidelong glance. Dad always said, you were the most determined woman he'd ever met. Said once you made up your mind, heaven help anyone who stood in your way. Did he now? I asked, amused and touched that Thomas had described me that way to our daughter. He did, Claire confirmed. And looking at what you've done these past few weeks, I can see he was right. We walked in companionable silence for another block before Claire spoke again. What do you think will happen with Daniel? Long term, I mean. It was a question I'd been asking myself since the day I'd walked away from the house. I don't know, I admitted. I hope eventually he'll understand why I made this decision. That he'll see it wasn't about rejecting him, but about reclaiming myself. And if he doesn't? Claire's voice was quiet, concerned. I considered this as we approached the hotel's illuminated entrance. Then I'll have to accept that too, I said, finally. I can't control how he responds, only how I live my own life. Claire nodded slowly, absorbing my words. When did you get so wise? She asked with a small smile. Around the same time I got so old, I quipped, drawing a laugh from her. But as we entered the warmth of the hotel lobby, I wondered if perhaps wisdom wasn't a function of age at all, but of necessity, of reaching a point where the pain of remaining, the same finally outweighed the fear of change. The morning we went to visit the house, a light rain was falling, the kind that seems more like mist than actual drops, coating everything in a glistening sheen. Claire drove Eleanor's car, allowing me to gather my thoughts as we approached the familiar street. The for sale sign was already planted in the front yard, stark white against the fading autumn landscape. Are you sure you're ready for this? Claire asked, putting the car in park across the street from the house. I studied the Victorian facade, the gabled roof, the wraparound porch where Thomas and I had spent countless summer evenings, the bay window where I'd watched seasons change, for 4 decades. It looked both achingly familiar and strangely distant, as if I were viewing it through the wrong end of a telescope. Yes, I said, reaching for the door handle. I need to do this. We approached the house slowly, and I was acutely aware of the neighbors' curtains twitching as we passed. No doubt the entire street was buzzing with gossip about my decision to sell. Mrs. Patterson, who had lived next door for 30 years, was watering plants on her porch despite the drizzle, obviously hoping to catch a glimpse of the drama. Good morning, Margaret, she called with manufactured casualness. Terrible weather we're having. It's good for the garden, I replied pleasantly, fishing my house keys from my purse. Mrs. Patterson, you remember my daughter Claire? Of course, she said, though her pinched smile suggested otherwise. All the way from Australia, isn't it? Such a long trip. Worth every minute, Claire said firmly, placing a protective hand on my back as we continued up the walkway. The key turned smoothly in the lock, but I hesitated before pushing the door open. Once I stepped inside, I would be a visitor rather than the mistress of the house. A subtle but significant shift. Mom? Claire prompted gently. We can still change our minds. No, I said, squaring my shoulders. let's go in. The foyer was immaculate, as I knew it would be. Vanessa's influence was evident in the minimalist decor, the cool color palette, the absence of the family photographs that had once lined the walls. I moved forward into the living room, where the original oak floors gleamed under modern furniture I barely recognized. "It's so different," Claire murmured, turning slowly to take in the transformed space. "I can hardly believe it's the same house." I nodded, trailing my fingers along the mantel where Thomas's collection of carved wooden birds had once perched. Now there was only a single abstract sculpture, elegant but impersonal. "Let's check the attic," I suggested, moving toward the stairs. "I want to make sure the remaining boxes are still there." Claire followed close behind as we ascended, the familiar creak of the third step striking a chord of nostalgia so strong it nearly stopped me in my tracks. At the top of the stairs, I pulled down the attic access ladder, wincing slightly as my arthritic knees protested the climb. The attic was much as we'd left it during my previous visit with Daniel. Dusty, dimly lit, filled with the accumulated treasures and detritus of decades. I moved purposefully toward the corner where several boxes of family photographs remained. "These need to come with us today," I said, pointing to the stack. "And that trunk with your grandmother's quilts." Claire nodded, already examining the labels on the boxes. "Mom, have you looked through these recently? There's one here marked Margaret, Personal Papers." I frowned, trying to recall. "That might be where I stored my journals and letters from your father." "I haven't seen it in years." Claire carefully opened the box, lifting out a leather-bound journal I recognized immediately. "It's dated the year you and Dad got married," she said, her voice soft with discovery. I felt a pang of something, between grief and gratitude. I thought those were lost in the basement flood years ago. "Apparently not," Claire said, closing the box carefully. "We should definitely take these with us." We worked methodically, identifying the most precious items to remove that day and making notes of what we'd need help retrieving later. The physical labor was therapeutic in a way I hadn't anticipated. Each box sorted, each decision made, another step toward closure. As we were preparing to carry the first load down, a sound from below froze us both in place. The front door, opening followed by voices. Daniel and Vanessa had returned unexpectedly. "What do we do?" Claire whispered, her expression tense. I straightened my spine, summoning the newfound courage that had carried me through the past weeks. "We continue with what we came to do. This is still legally my house." We descended the attic ladder carefully, the box of journals clutched in Claire's arms. Daniel's voice drifted up from the kitchen, followed by Vanessa's sharper tones. I couldn't make out the words, but the agitated cadence was unmistakable. When we reached the bottom of the main staircase, they came into view. Daniel hunched over, the kitchen island, Vanessa pacing beside him with her phone pressed to her ear. They both looked up at the sound of our footsteps, identical expressions of shock freezing on their faces. "Mom?" Daniel straightened, his voice caught between surprise and accusation. "What are you doing here?" "Hello, Daniel," I said calmly. "Claire and I came to collect some personal items." Vanessa ended her call abruptly, her eyes narrowing as they fixed on Claire. "You didn't think to call first? This is our home now." "Actually," Claire said, her voice cool but controlled, "it's still legally my mother's house for the next 3 weeks. We have every right to be here." Daniel's face had gone pale, his gaze locked on the box in Claire's arms. "What are you taking?" "Just some old journals and photographs," I explained. "Things that hold sentimental value." Vanessa's posture stiffened. "We saw the sign," she said accusingly. "You really went through with it. You're actually selling the house." "Yes," I confirmed. "The listing went live this morning." Daniel shook, his head slowly, something like disbelief clouding his features. "I still can't believe you're doing this to us." "She's not doing anything to you," Claire interjected, a protective edge sharpening her voice. She's making decisions for herself. There's a difference. Vanessa crossed her arms, her gaze calculating. And you've come all the way from Australia to help her dismantle our lives? How convenient that you show up now, after years of absence, to stake your claim. I felt Claire stiffen beside me, ready to respond, but I placed a quieting hand on her arm. This isn't about claims or sides, Vanessa. Claire is here because I asked her to come. Of course you did, Daniel muttered. You two against us. It's always been that way. The bitterness in his voice took me aback. That's not true, Daniel. I've supported you throughout your life, your education, your career, your marriage. Until now, he countered. Until we needed you to be reasonable about the house. Reasonable meaning doing exactly what you wanted without question? Claire asked, unable to contain herself any longer. Living in the basement while you plan to ship her off to a retirement home? Daniel's face flushed with anger. You have no idea what we've been dealing with. Mom's been increasingly forgetful. Her arthritis makes it impossible for her to maintain this place. And we've been shouldering all the responsibility while you've been off living your perfect life in Australia. That's not fair, I said quietly. I've been managing perfectly well. My memory is fine, and my arthritis, while painful, doesn't make me incompetent. Vanessa made a small, dismissive sound. You only say that because you don't see the changes. We've observed the forgotten appointments, the confusion about days of the week. Appointments I never made, I interrupted firmly. Days you changed our lunch plans without telling me. Vanessa, I've been keeping my own calendar for 68 years. I didn't suddenly forget how. A tense silence descended over the kitchen. Daniel and Vanessa exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. Something between frustration and calculation. The real estate agent says we'll likely have offers within the week, I continued, keeping my voice even. I'd appreciate it if you'd both ensure the house is presentable for showings. You can't be serious, Vanessa said incredulously. You expect us to help sell the house out from under us? I expect you to respect the legal notice you've been given, I replied, and to remember that this arrangement was always temporary, of your making, not mine. Daniel slammed his hand down on the counter, the sudden violence of the gesture making us all jump. This is unconscionable, he said, his voice trembling with emotion. After everything we've done for you. Claire set the box down carefully and stepped forward, her expression intent. That's the problem, isn't it? You think taking care of Mom means controlling her? It doesn't. It means respecting her autonomy, her wishes, her right to make her own decisions, even when you don't agree with them. Stay out of this, Daniel snapped. You've been gone for years. You don't get to swoop in now and judge us. I'm not judging, Claire insisted. I'm defending Mom's right to live her life on her terms. I looked between my two children, Claire standing straight and determined, Daniel hunched and defensive, and felt a profound sadness for the rift that had opened between them. They had been close once, building forts in the backyard, catching fireflies in summer twilight. How had we arrived at this moment of such painful division? We didn't come here to argue, I said, trying to diffuse the tension. We just came for a few personal items. We'll be gone soon. Take whatever you want, Daniel said bitterly. It's clear the house and everything in it means nothing to you anymore. The unfairness of this accusation stung. That's not true, I replied, keeping my voice steady. This house has been my heart for 40 years, but it's just a structure, Daniel. What matters are the memories we created here, the love we shared. Those don't disappear with a change of address. Save the sentimentality, Vanessa cut in. You've made your choice. Now we have to scramble to find somewhere else to live because you've decided to have some kind of late-life crisis. Claire opened her mouth to retort, but I shook my head slightly. There was no point in escalating the confrontation further. We'll get what we came for and go, I said firmly. Claire, Could you bring the car closer to the front door? These boxes are heavy. As Claire left to move the car, an uncomfortable silence settled over the kitchen. Daniel wouldn't meet my eyes, focusing instead on some invisible point beyond the window. Vanessa busied herself with her phone, pointedly ignoring my presence. I took a moment to really look at my son, the tense set of his shoulders, the lines of stress around his mouth, the flickers of hurt and anger in his averted gaze. Despite everything, my heart ached for him. He was still my child, still the little boy who had once run to me with scraped knees and broken toys, trusting me to make everything right. "Daniel," I said softly, "I hope someday you'll understand that this isn't about rejecting you. It's about learning to value myself." He didn't respond, but I caught a slight tremor in his jaw before he turned away completely, effectively ending the conversation. When Claire returned, we worked quickly and silently, loading the most important boxes into the trunk of Eleanor's car. As we prepared to leave, I paused in the foyer for one last look around, not at what the house had become in Daniel and Vanessa's hands, but at what it had been during the happiest years of my life. In my mind's eye, I could still see Thomas coming through the front door with an armful of groceries, Claire sliding down the banister despite our repeated warnings, Daniel practicing his clarinet in the window seat. "Ready?" Claire asked gently, touching my elbow. I nodded, unexpected, tears pricking at my eyes. "Yes," I said. "I'm ready." As we drove away, I didn't look back at the house. Instead, I focused on the weight of the journals in my lap, tangible connections to a past that would always be part of me, no matter where I lived. The confrontation with Daniel and Vanessa had been painful, but also clarifying. The gulf between us wasn't just about the house or my living arrangements. It was about fundamentally different understandings of respect, independence, and family. "Are you okay?" Claire asked as we turned onto the main road. I considered the question carefully. "Not entirely," I admitted, "but I will be." And for the first time since this journey began, I fully believed it. The house sold in 6 days, 3 days of showings, 1 day for offers to come in, and 2 days of negotiations. Olivia called me at the hotel with the news, her voice bright, with professional satisfaction. 4 offers, she announced, all above asking price. The couple I mentioned, the history professor and the architect, came in with the highest bid. They're absolutely in love with the original features and plan. To restore rather than renovate. Something eased in my chest at this news. The thought of my home being cherished rather than dismantled felt like a benediction of sorts. "When do they want to close?" I asked. "They're pushing for a quick closing. 3 weeks. I told them about the current occupancy situation," she added delicately, "and they're willing to be flexible if your son needs additional time to relocate." I thought about Daniel and Vanessa, still sullen and resistant when Claire and I had returned for the remaining boxes. "I think the original timeline will stand," I said firmly. "They've had notice. The proceeds from the sale would be substantial, far more than Thomas and I could have imagined when we'd bought the place as newlyweds with limited savings. Even after setting aside money for Claire and Daniel, I would have more than enough to secure comfortable housing and still indulge in some of the travel I'd put off for years." As I hung up the phone, I found Claire watching me from the hotel suite's sitting area, concern etched in her features. "Good news?" she asked. "The best," I confirmed. "The buyers are a couple who appreciate the home's history. They're paying well above asking price." Claire smiled, but I could see she was troubled. "Have you decided what you'll do next? Where you'll live?" I joined her on the sofa, tucking my feet beneath me in a casual posture that would have been impossible in the basement's damp chill. "I've been thinking about your invitation," I admitted. "About visiting Australia." Her face brightened, immediately. "Really? You're considering it?" "More than considering," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "I'd like to come, not permanently," I added quickly, but for an extended visit. Perhaps 3 months? Claire's answering smile was radiant. Mom, that's wonderful. The kids will be over the moon, and Mark has been hoping to show you his research center. When would you want to come? After the closing, I said. I need to be here to sign the papers and to make arrangements for storage of the things I'm keeping. I paused, then added, and I need to try once more with Daniel. Her expression sobered. Do you think that's wise? He seemed pretty entrenched in his position. Probably not, I acknowledged. But I need to know I've done everything possible to maintain our relationship. He's still my son, Claire. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. Of course he is. Just prepare yourself for disappointment. Daniel can be stubborn when he feels wronged, like his father, I said with a small smile, remembering Thomas's legendary tenacity. But your father also knew when to extend an olive branch. The next day, I called Daniel's office, deliberately choosing a time when I knew Vanessa would be in her regular Thursday marketing meeting. His assistant put me through with a hesitation that suggested she was aware of our estrangement. Mom? Daniel's voice held cautious surprise. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, I assured him. The house has sold. The new owners are a couple who plan to preserve its historical features. A long silence followed. Then, congratulations, he said, the word clipped and formal. I pressed on, determined to bridge the chasm between us. I was hoping we could meet for lunch, just the two of us, to talk about next steps. Next steps, he echoed flatly. I think you've made those quite clear. Daniel, I said, trying to keep the plea from my voice. You're my son. I don't want this rift between us. Another pause. This one stretching so long I wondered if he'd hung up. Finally, he sighed, a sound so weary it made my heart ache. Fine. Casey's Diner tomorrow at noon? Casey's had been our special place when he was growing up. Weekend breakfasts after his soccer games, celebratory dinners after school achievements. That he suggested it felt like a small concession, a tiny crack in the wall he'd built. I'll be there, I promised. Thank you, Daniel. The following day, I arrived at Casey's 20 minutes early, choosing a booth near the back where we could talk privately. The diner had hardly changed in 30 years. The same red vinyl booths, the same laminated menus, the same collection of local sports memorabilia on the walls. I ordered coffee and waited, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, to still their trembling. Daniel arrived precisely at noon, dressed in his work clothes, a crisp button-down and tie that made him look so much like Thomas it caused a physical pang in my chest. He slid into the booth across from me, his expression carefully neutral. You look well, he said after ordering his own coffee. The hotel life must agree with you. It's comfortable, I acknowledged, but temporary. I've been making plans for what comes next. His eyebrows rose slightly. Sunny Pines, after all? Australia, actually, I said, watching his reaction carefully. Claire has invited me for an extended visit. Surprise flickered across his face, followed quickly by something harder to identify. Hurt, perhaps, or resignation. Australia, he repeated. That's far. 3 months, I clarified. Just to start. To spend time with the grandchildren, to see Claire's life there. After that, I'll decide on a more permanent arrangement. The waitress arrived with Daniel's coffee and took our lunch orders, a routine so familiar it momentarily bridged the estrangement between us. When she left, Daniel added cream to his coffee with the same methodical precision he'd shown since. Childhood. So you're really doing this, he said, more statement than question. Selling the house, moving to Australia, starting over at 68. Not starting over, I corrected gently. Continuing. My life didn't end when your father died. Daniel, it changed, certainly, but it continued. And it will continue after I sell the house. He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You're different," he finally said. "Since you moved out? More, I don't know, determined." "I've remembered who I am," I said simply. "Beyond being your mother or Thomas's wife. Just Margaret." A flicker of something, recognition perhaps, crossed his face. "Dad used to say that about you, that you had a core of steel beneath all the nurturing. I never really saw it until now." The mention of Thomas, spoken without bitterness, felt like a small victory. "Your father knew me better than anyone," I said. He would have understood this decision, I think. Daniel's jaw tightened. "We'll never—" "No, will we?" I let the comment pass, unwilling to turn this reconciliation attempt into another argument about what Thomas would have wanted. After a moment, Daniel sighed and rubbed his temples. "Vanessa and I found an apartment," he said abruptly, "in the West Side development. We'll be out of the house by the end of next week." Relief flooded through me. "That's good news. Is it a place you like?" He shrugged one shoulder. "It's fine. Modern, close to both our offices. No charm, but plenty of amenities." "I'm sorry it had to happen this way," I said, meaning it. "I never wanted to disrupt your lives. Didn't you?" The question held more curiosity than accusation. "Wasn't that exactly what you intended when you decided to sell?" I considered this carefully. "I intended to reclaim my agency," I said finally. "The disruption was a consequence, not the goal." The waitress returned with our meals, a club sandwich for Daniel, a bowl of tomato soup, and half a turkey sandwich for me. We ate in silence for a few minutes, the familiar food providing a comforting backdrop to the difficult conversation. "Claire, leaves next Tuesday?" Daniel asked eventually, surprising me with his awareness of his sister's schedule. "Yes. Her flight's at 2 p.m. I hesitated, then added, "She'd like to see you before she goes." He focused on his sandwich, carefully removing a piece of bacon. "I'm not sure that's a good idea. Things got pretty heated at the house." "She was defending me," I pointed out, "as you would have done if the situation were reversed." He didn't deny this, which I took as another small victory. "Maybe," he conceded. "I'll think about it." As we finished our meal, I reached into my purse and withdrew an envelope. "I wanted to give you this," I said, sliding it across the table. "It's not contingent on anything. It's yours regardless of how things stand between us." Daniel eyed the envelope suspiciously. "What is it?" "A portion of the proceeds from the house sale," I explained. "Equal to Claire's share. Not because you need it, but because it's right. That home represented your father's and my life's work. It should benefit both our children." He didn't touch the envelope. "I don't want your money, Mom." "It's not just my money," I insisted. "It's your heritage. Your father would want you to have it." A muscle worked in his jaw. "Is this supposed to make everything okay? A payoff to smooth over what you've done?" The accusation stung, but I kept my voice calm. "No, it's a mother's wish to provide for her child and a recognition of your father's legacy. Take it or don't, Daniel. As I said, it's not contingent on anything." He finally picked up the envelope, tucking it into his jacket pocket without opening it. "Thank you," he said stiffly. As the waitress cleared our plates, I took a deep breath and broached the subject I'd been avoiding. "Will you come to the airport on Tuesday? To see Claire off and to say goodbye to me?" Daniel looked down at his empty coffee cup, turning it slowly between his fingers. "I don't know, Mom. This is all still difficult." "I understand," I said, though the prospect of leaving without a proper farewell from my son created a hollow sensation in my chest. "The invitation stands if you change your mind." When we parted outside the diner, our goodbye was awkward, neither of us certain whether to embrace or simply nod. In the end, Daniel leaned in briefly, his hug so perfunctory it barely qualified as physical contact. Safe travels, he said, already turning toward his car. Let me know when you're back from Australia. I will, I promised, watching him walk away with the strange certainty that we were both at a crossroads, not just in our relationship, but in our understanding of ourselves. The days before Claire's departure passed in a whirlwind of preparations. I signed the closing documents for the house, arranged for my remaining possessions to be placed in storage, and purchased a one-way ticket to Sydney for the following week. Eleanor helped me sort through what I would take to Australia and what could wait until my return, her practical efficiency making the task less daunting. "You're really doing this," she marveled as we packed my suitcases. Margaret Wellington, International Woman of Mystery. I laughed at her characterization. Hardly mysterious, just a grandmother visiting her family. A grandmother who upended her entire life at 68, Eleanor corrected, folding a sweater with precise motions. Don't downplay what you've accomplished, Margaret. It takes enormous courage to do what you've done. On Tuesday, Eleanor drove us to the airport, her vintage sedan laden with luggage for Claire's return journey and my imminent departure. As we approached the terminal, I scanned the drop-off area instinctively, searching for any sign of Daniel. There was none. Claire must have noticed my disappointment. "He might still come," she said, squeezing my hand. "There's time." But as we completed Claire's check-in process and made our way toward security, I accepted the reality. Daniel had chosen not to come. The hurt was sharp, but not surprising. "Well," Eleanor said briskly, clearly trying to distract me, "you have your ticket for next week? Everything arranged?" "All set," I confirmed. "1 week from today, I'll be following Claire to Sydney." "Good," she said firmly. "You deserve this adventure, and these darling grandchildren deserve to know their remarkable grandmother." Claire checked her watch reluctantly. "I should go through security," she said. "I don't want to cut it too close." We embraced, Eleanor first and then me, holding on to my daughter with the bitter sweetness of parting. "I'll see you in a week," I reminded her. "This isn't goodbye." "Just a brief intermission," Claire agreed, her smile a little watery. "I'll have everything ready for you." As she turned to go, a familiar voice called out across the terminal. "Claire! Mom! Wait!" Daniel was hurrying toward us, slightly out of breath, a small gift bag clutched in one hand. He reached us just as Claire was preparing to join the security line. "I thought I'd missed you," he said, looking between us with an uncertain expression. "Traffic was terrible." "You're just in time," Claire said, her voice carefully neutral. I was about to go through security. Daniel handed her the gift bag awkwardly. "For the kids," he explained. "Some books from that series they like. You mentioned it at Christmas on the video call." Claire's expression softened at this evidence that he'd been paying attention. "Thank you, Daniel. They'll love them." An uncomfortable silence fell between them, years of distance and the recent conflict creating a barrier neither seemed sure how to breach. Finally, Claire took the initiative, stepping forward to embrace her brother briefly. "Take care of yourself," she said, "and maybe call sometimes? The kids should know their uncle." Daniel nodded, his posture relaxing slightly. "I'd like that." As Claire disappeared through the security checkpoint with a final wave, Daniel turned to me, his expression guarded, but no longer hostile. "I wasn't sure I was going to come," he admitted. "I'm glad you did," I said simply. "It means a lot to Claire, and to me." He shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Eleanor, who tactfully announced she needed to use the restroom and would meet me at the car. Once we were alone, Daniel spoke hesitantly. "Vanessa and I have been talking. Actually, we've seen a counselor a couple of times since everything. This surprised me." "That's good, Daniel. I hope it's helping." "It is," he said. "It's making me realize some things about myself, about how I've been treating you." He paused, struggling visibly with what he wanted to say. I may not agree with all your decisions, but I shouldn't have tried to control you the way I did. That was wrong. The simple acknowledgement, clearly difficult for him to make, felt like a precious gift. Thank you for saying that. He nodded, shoving his hands in his pockets. I'm still processing everything, but I don't want you to go to Australia, thinking I hate you or something. I never thought that, I assured him. I know you were hurt and angry, but I never doubted your love. Good. He glanced at his watch. I should get back to work. You leave next week? Tuesday, I confirmed, but I'll be back in 3 months. This isn't permanent. Right. He hesitated, then added, maybe when you get back we could have dinner. Or something. All of us, if Vanessa's willing. Try to start fresh. The offer, tentative as it was, filled me with cautious hope. I'd like that very much. This time when we parted, his hug was genuine, still brief, but warm. As I watched him walk away, I felt a sense of completion, as if the final piece of a complex puzzle had fallen into place. Eleanor was waiting by the car, her expression questioning. Good talk? She asked as I approached. A beginning, I said, sliding into the passenger seat. Not a resolution, but a beginning. 1 week later, I stood in the same terminal, this time as the departing passenger. Eleanor had insisted on driving me, fussing over my luggage and passport with motherly concern. Despite being only 5 years my senior. You have everything? Medication, phone charger, Claire's address? All accounted for, I assured her, amused by her fretting. I'm visiting my daughter Eleanor, not embarking on an Arctic expedition. It might as well be the Arctic for how far away it is, she grumbled. Promise you'll call when you land? And video chat at least weekly? I promise, I said, embracing her warmly. Take care of yourself. And water my plants at your place, please. Of course. She stepped back, studying me with affection and pride. Look at you, Margaret Wellington. Who would have thought 3 months ago that you'd be standing here now, about to board a plane to Australia? Indeed, who would have thought? Certainly not the woman sleeping on a thin mattress in a damp basement, listening to her daughter-in-law plan her removal. That woman had felt diminished, erased, her life reduced to whatever space others deigned to grant her. But as I turned to join the security line, my passport and boarding pass in hand, I felt expanded rather than diminished. My horizons literally and figuratively broader than they had been in years. The future stretched before me, not as a narrowing path leading inevitably to dependence and obscurity, but as an open landscape of possibilities. I thought about the journal entries I'd discovered among the boxes we'd retrieved from the attic. My younger self's hopes and fears, dreams and disappointments. In one entry, written shortly after Daniel's birth, I'd confessed my terror of somehow losing myself in motherhood, of becoming only an extension of my children rather than a person, in my own right. I want to be a good mother, I'd written, but I don't want that to be all I am. Is it selfish to want to remain Margaret even as I become mom? Now, decades later, I finally had my answer. It wasn't selfish at all. It was essential. Not just for me, but for my children as well. What better legacy could I leave them than the example of a woman who refused to disappear, who insisted on her right to exist fully, even in the autumn of her life? As I passed through security and headed toward my gate, I felt lighter than I had in years, unburdened by others' expectations or my own misplaced guilt. I was Margaret Wellington, 68 years old, embarking on a journey none of us had anticipated. The thought filled me not with anxiety, but with a quiet exhilaration. The foundation of sacrifice that had defined so much of my life had crumbled beneath me, forcing me to build something new, something sturdy enough to support not just the people I loved, but myself as well. It wasn't the life I had planned, but standing at the threshold of this unexpected chapter, I wouldn't have changed a thing. Final boarding call for Qantas Flight 12 to Sydney. The announcement came over the loudspeaker, jolting me from my reflections. Gathered my carry-on bag and stepped forward, ready for whatever came next. After all, I had nowhere to go but forward, into a future entirely of my own making. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.